Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. In this episode, I'll be talking to the people behind Africa Archive, a preprint service aimed to raise the profile and visibility in science from and for the African continent. It may sound like a long shot from software and technology, but as we all know, research projects are expected to publish their results in relevant science journals. Funding of research projects in institutions, and by proxy the work we as research software engineers do, depend on that. But it's also a costly exercise, which is one of the reasons why some researchers and scientists struggle to get their work recognized. This is a struggle well known to Africa Archive, who, since 2018, work hard to give researchers and scientists from the continent more visibility and help them to get their research output published and recognized. And here now my conversation with Joy Owango, Joe Haverman, Nabil Kubisi, and Johansson Obanda. Hello everybody, and welcome to the show. We've got quite an exciting round of people today from Africa Archive, and maybe we can start a quick round of introductions. So Joy, do you want to go first?
Okay, thanks, Peter. I'm the Executive Director of the Training Center in Communication, which is a trust in partnership with the University of Nairobi, housed at the College of Biological and Physical Sciences. And what we do is support researchers, research institutes, and governments on how they can improve their research outputs and increase their visibility through training. And I sit on the board of Africa Archive.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's go to Johnson.
My name is Johansson Obanda, and I come from Kenya. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm community manager at Africa Archive, and my role is basically to manage the community of Africa Archive and also to disseminate information from Africa Archive. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Joe.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Haverman, based out of Berlin, Germany. Normally around this time of year, I would also be in Kenya or otherwhere, like somewhere else on the continent. Co-founder of Africa Archive, and yeah, to hand over to Nabil.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Peter, for this opportunity. My name is Nabil Xivi. I'm engagement lead at ORCID, the Open Researcher and Contributor ID. I also serve in the board of advisors at Africa Archive. I'm originally from Tunisia and I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and very pleased to be with you today.
Excellent. Could you explain what Africa Archive is and what the main objectives are? Shall we start again with you, Joy?
When I look at Africa Archive, I see it as a platform that gives us the capacity to share our research. When I say our, it's African research output, and also increase our research visibility. A platform where we are able to store our data and at the same time own our data as well. So that is that's what I see when I look at Africa Archive. And then when I break it down, I look at it as a preprint server that is able to support early career researchers and even mature researchers from Africa as they're going through their journal strategy process, selection process. Their manuscripts will start being seen and collecting citations and downloads as they are identifying the journals they intend to publish in. So I look at it as a platform that is there to help increase our research visibility and to also showcase our research output.
Joe, how long has Africa Archive been operating?
We launched in June 2018, so it's a little bit more than 2.5 years now.
So it's a relatively young organization. So how was the launch for you? I mean, it's quite an endeavor because the science publishing world is quite busy. So the big publishers, and we already have some preprints. I can imagine that you faced a number of obstacles. I mean, how was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the preprint landscape has grown even further and has now also started to materialize, where many publishers in the past 2 years really only started embracing preprints to build like another business model out of it. That's not the idea with preprint repositories from the onset. Like, we started 2.5 years ago along with the Center for Open Science, and basically joining a trend where not only discipline-specific preprint repositories emerged, like following the lead from archive.org, which has been around since the early 90s, but also like Paleo Archive, there's Meta Archive, there's Sports Archive. So the Center for Open Science has made it relatively easy to build a community around such a service, to deposit your work as in green open access, free of charge. And that's basically a boost for discoverability and for reputation building for early career researchers, and also for researchers who otherwise don't have much of support and capacity to make a buzz about their results. So this is why we launched Africa Archive at the time, and we have evolved further into an open access platform, now also partnering with other organizations that support open science and open access on a global and Western scale to make it applicable for African scholars in particular, in our case.
I'd like to drill back down a little bit, if I may, because there is the preprint service, and you mentioned archive already. But where does it sit actually in the value chain? Because ultimately what scientists do, they do the research, and then ultimately it needs to be published, right? It needs to go into one of the big journals. Where in that process does preprint sit? And is it sort of like an interim step towards publishing, or how would you regard that?
When we look at the preprint service, for example, Africa Archive, it's a platform. It's an open access platform. So you're looking at it mainly this way as a convenient mode for authors to submit their articles, because they are not peer reviewed, basically. Okay, so it's a short time before your article is open for other people to access. Yeah, and also everyone can openly access it. So the position of preprints, I would say, could be interim, because authors still have the option of continuing further to publish in any journal that they want. In any case, the preprint is not already partnering with an established journal, so they have also that option. And also they have an option of publishing an already published article to the preprint. It's also because of how they would want their articles to be accessed. So for preprint, it's open access. For publishing, it would vary.
Well, thank you very much. Does anybody would like to add anything to that?
From a value chain perspective, I see a preprint server, so a preprint on even open access platform, publishing platform like Africa Archive, being in the middle. If you're looking at it from a value chain perspective, it's in the middle between the author and the publisher. So from a value chain perspective, we're in a situation whereby they need each other right now. I can give a case in point. I had an interview with AAAS last night. They're the ones who publish science. And their biggest challenge was, how can we access research output and manuscripts coming out of the continent, out of Africa? My answer was very simple: work with a preprint server. So like in this case, Africa Archive would be perfect, because we have access to the African authors. They come through us so that their work can be much more visible. And the publisher can identify what papers he can use and accept in his manuscript. Even that is one option. Or if the author has identified those journals and we're in, let's say, partnership hypothetically with the AAAS, it means that authors are comfortable knowing that through here, there are chances where we can get our journals, our manuscripts published. So when I look at the value chain system, it is right in the middle. It's the author, you've done your research, you've done everything. Then there's the archive, in this case, Africa Archive. Then there's the publisher.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid that, just quickly for the listener, I'm afraid we have lost Nabil because of a poor connection.
Yes,
so maybe he can join later. I think that's quite an interesting aspect. Thank you for clarifying, Joy, Johnson and Joe. I can imagine that as a new service of that kind, you face a number of challenges because, as I mentioned previously, the publishing sector is actually quite busy. There are the big publishers, and you're trying to connect that to make a science that happens in Africa more visible. How has this been going so far? What's your experience been in the last 2 years?
I can give the experience I've had in conferences where these publishers sit. So the STM conference, the Society of Scholarly Publishers. So this is where all these the big boys sit, and I've given talks in those conferences. This is a reality that has come out very powerfully. They're looking for research output coming out of the continent. Mm-hmm. They are cognizant of the fact that what they already have, it's not that it's not good, but it's a bit saturated. So there's a demand for research output coming out of the continent. They do not know how to start. And they're also distressed because they're dealing with a continent that is extremely diverse. You're looking at 1.3 billion people with over 1,000 languages, or 6,000 if I'm not wrong. So how do we start communicating with researchers? Are we going to do it in the unifying languages, in Swahili, French, Francophone Africa? Are we going to do it in Yoruba? In some of these countries where one language is the main language per country. So Yoruba being the main language in Nigeria with over 180 million people, where you have journals in Yoruba, where you have, or Ethiopia, where you have journals in Amharic. For them, what I see is opportunities that are coming up. But the question is, how do you handle those opportunities? Gone are the days when they would look at Africa and then go down south, because that's how it has always been. You look at Africa and then you say, yes, we've got manuscripts from South Africa, and then it's lumped up as the whole continent. But Africa Archive has brought out the reality that there are 54 countries on this continent, 54 countries with researchers in those respective countries. Africa Archive has brought out the fact that there is a demand for research output also in indigenous language, because that's what has been, you can see that in the platform. In also unifying languages of the region, there's some in Swahili. I've seen Swahili, I've seen French. So French is for the Francophone Africa. What I'm seeing for them are opportunities. And it's how they should take advantage of systems that have been set in the continent that are supporting and increasing the research output and visibility that is coming out of Africa. That's how I see the publishers. Even though they are busy, the reality is that they are looking for indigenous knowledge coming out of the continent. That is something they've been very clear about. The question is how to go about it.
Anybody else?
The preprint allows for early careers to explore publishing, and while doing that, then they get better and better in or refining their publication skills. With time. So I think that has been a challenge. I think it hails from capacity building.
Publishing is often also the route to science funding, isn't it? You need to publish, or as they say, perish. You either sort of go into a journal and sort of then be accepted and then use that as reason for getting a next funding round. Have you seen that the funding for research in Africa has been boosted by the work you do? If that is the case, or what has your experience been in that?
The question is very much on point, and the answer is we're not there yet. So we're still building capacity. We're also running on a very tight budget, and we're basically orchestrating like 10 to 20 workflows every day, like each of us, with a small and a highly dedicated team. And as Johnson just pointed out, so it also has to do a lot with capacity building, not only in Africa. I'm also a trainer for open science communication and publishing, scientific writing, which also Joy is doing with TCC Africa. So we see the same challenges with not only early career researchers, but from any experience level. Like, the publishing world is very confusing these days, and there's a lot of buzz about open access, and in the past 2 to 3 years open access has been misused as a term for revenue building by certain publishers. So there's an assumption across researchers of all disciplines that open access presumably is expensive, and it's the opposite. Like, the idea, like opportunities like preprint repositories like ours give researchers the opportunity to not pay a cent and still build reputation with their research outcomes, which they don't know they have as an opportunity by reading that, if you want to publish open access, then you pay $3,000 to $5,000 per article. This is beyond any reasonable number. Also, why should it come from a researcher's budget? We are in a transitional phase. There's many power dynamics behind the scenes. It is a confusing landscape for a researcher to wrap their heads around. And trainers like Joy and myself and many others, we have a hard time, but it's basically what needs to happen, to explain that back to the research. Like, here's an opportunity. It's not a lot of extra effort. It's basically 3 to 5 mouse clicks, and you have the visibility that you need for your work, also to generate funds, as I said earlier. And it's a time of publish and perish. We're beyond publish or perish, but it's not enough to publish. Like, you also need indexing. And this is what we also provide. So we come with a lot of benefits and added value.
Right.
It's just that to the researcher, it is too much to, like, they're also there to do research. They shouldn't be concerned with the politics behind the scenes, which we are very much concerned about. We are basically finding our position, and we're negotiating with many stakeholders in the ecosystem, and we have many fruitful discussions. Everything, all of that takes time, but we are very positive that we will, within the next 2 or 3 months, we will also have some positive announcements to make to scale this capacity building that we see lacking today through trainings, through partnerships with publishers, with other training institutions, peer review organizations that we are in contact with. So there's many partners and stakeholders lined up that are ready to dive in and to build the capacity that we need for African scholars to have a piece of the cake.
Okay, Joy, do you want to add something to it?
In regards to the confusion, I think, in my opinion, I think it's deliberate. I really believe it's deliberate, because
what do you mean?
The noble expectation of what open access was equitable access to research resources, and by default also in the access to publishing in journals at affordable prices and all that. What I feel publishers are doing, especially when open access became, especially after Plan S, we are seeing publishers becoming bullish on how they are giving the narrative to researchers. And that is why you'll find a researcher so confused trying to understand what open access is all about, because they know the original objective of it was to have equitable access to resources. Then all of a sudden they're slapped with these bills. That is why also Johansson was saying that the need for awareness is important. So whenever we are doing these trainings, whether it's at government level, researcher institutional level, or individual level, we are constantly reminding them the difference between open science and open access. We're always reminding them the fact that they are writing papers and they're going to publish. They're getting into the business of publishing. So they need to learn how to negotiate, especially if they get into journals that have really high fees, because it's a reality that they have to face. They shouldn't get themselves embroiled in the politics. Their objective is to learn to negotiate, or just say, no, this is too much, go to another one. You see, that's what I'm saying. It was deliberate, because I don't think we had this kind of confusion before 2018. We knew about open access and what it entailed, but this confusion has been quite entrenched in the last 2 years, because everybody has been talking about open science and open access, and publishers have to make money. I get it, they have to make money, and that is okay, but it's an issue of making money ethically, and that is now where people are having problems, and they're being called out to that. So the confusion makes you forget the underlying problem, that you still have to pay, or you still not maybe have access to some of these resources.
I think it's a very good distinction that you made there between open science and open access. And with regards to the publishers, I mean, the publishers made quite a lot of money from science publishing traditionally for many, many years. And I know a little bit because I used to work for one. But I think sort of ultimately the publisher will then say, okay, it's either take it or leave it. I mean, how do you negotiate that? Because they want something in and for them as well. I mean, they probably say, well, we need to make money too, don't we? So how do you guarantee that?
As I said, when I was saying about the business bit, I was playing devil's advocate. I understand it's a delicate balance, but then it should not be intentional in the manner in which they are doing to make sure that it's still them making these billions or millions of dollars per quarter, whereas they're taking advantage of what was originally meant to be accessed equitably. All right. Like Jo had, I don't know that she mentioned this, the fact that we have systems in the continent like publishing platforms, Africa Archive, there's also the Africa Academies of Sciences platform. Why not invest in these systems? Invest in this system so that there can be a better way, or maybe a reduced pricing to access some of these journals. Basically, we are not saying that don't pay, because the reality is we will still need to pay. Somebody will need to pay something at the end of the day. What we are saying is that don't take advantage of the situation. This is why, you see, when you're looking at Africa Archive, I look at it sometimes as a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that people have suffered so much in the continent in finding ways to increase their research output and increasing their research visibility, and being gaslit, is that the right word? Gaslit, that their work is not good, that Africa Archive has come up and say, hey, here's the data, here's the research output, here's the visibility. You can see the altmetric score. This is what people are saying about it. So, the gaslighting is being dimmed, but the cost is still there. It's still prohibitive. So what should they do? But then just invest in the systems, the open access systems that are supporting increasing research visibility and output from the regions, because they will need that output for their journals at the end of the day. We're talking about ethical practices. It's not like business 50 years ago. You know what I mean? The times are changing.
I think publishers are getting nervous. We had famous cases in California, actually, where some of the universities say they're no longer willing to pay these.
Oh, the University of California system.
Yeah, exactly. They no longer want to pay these high subscription fees. I don't know how that ended, but I think I think publishers are waking up to the fact that things are changing, and your system is helping. But yes, I appreciate that it's a delicate balance. I want to also understand a little bit. You mentioned 54 different countries with very different cultures and a huge range of different languages. Managing all of that must be a huge task. How do you do that?
The first thing that I've seen, and Joe can confirm this, and also Johansson, is taking advantage of the unifying languages of the region. Because you see, as much as there are 54 countries, there are unifying languages of the region. So there's Francophone Africa that can cover a chunk of the continent. There's Lusophone Africa, there's Arabic Africa. So basically, I always tell people, and this is not the first time I've actually been asked this, we are looking at the African Union languages, and this is something you can get in the African Union website. There's Swahili in one region, okay? So start by taking advantage of those unifying languages, and that is what we are seeing indexed as well. There's those in French, Portuguese, Arabic, Swahili. I've seen Swahili. That is killing one bird fast. Then there are countries where there are large countries and it is one language. That's what I was saying. Like Ethiopia is Amharic. It is the main language, it's the official language. There are journals in Amharic. So it is starting with the unifying languages, then going to the respective countries that have one language that they use for business, and they use it officially, which can also be used for writing research output. So in Nigeria, it's Yoruba as well.
I also owe it to strategic partnerships that we have in the continent. TCC Africa, and TCC Africa has a number of other authors who have also submitted to Africa Archive, and to the south and also to the west of Africa. So strategic partnerships help really so much in this. And also the efforts we put towards communicating what we do as Africa Archive, and through our social media handles, and through the followership that we have across Africa. And also those also reach out to other relevant people who in turn use the service.
Now we're in this kind of lockdown period. There is the coronavirus spread. How did that work actually impact you? Did that change anything to the better, to the worse, or is it more or less the same? How is the situation for you guys?
Joe, talk about it, because this is something that that blew up in a nice way, especially for the coronavirus platform.
We carried each other through this pandemic, through the first phase of, what's happening, the first phase of global panicking. But I think we made good use of the situation, where Joy basically took the lead. It's like, hey, if we can't have on-site trainings anymore, let's just take everything online. And we found ourselves having thought leadership conversations with basically all the stakeholders that otherwise we would have to chase, traveling to different parts of the world. Many have talked about this blessing in disguise, and the disguise is very dark. And it's also an opportunity for African stakeholders to take to the stage and to take part in discussions that are otherwise only happening in New York City and London and Berlin and wherever else. It's also kind of a real learning for Westerners, where it's like, oh, if you guys don't have the money to travel this side of the world, just join us online. We realized like it's actually not so easy to join online. We've all dealt with the hiccups and the obstacles and the technical hurdles that come with online connectivity.
You're adapting.
I'm also talking about like Western context, like where you think you have stable internet and everything is fine, but it's a different thing of being actually there to an online conference and just being able to see things through a screen, which is already a lot compared to not being able to participate in the first place. There's all kinds of relearnings and opportunities that came with it. And I think we made best possible use of it. But yeah, there have been so many facilitated discussions by also other actors in this ecosystem of scholarly publishing on the continent. I'd also like to mention AJOR, the African Journals Online platform. I'd like to mention Vakren and their librarian-focused discussions. They also invited us to join these discussions, which otherwise we would have had to travel and hop the continent to for being able to participate in these discussions. But now everything is happening online, and it's a blessing.
But also mention, you see, the thing is, when COVID hit, we were not seeing the research output come. You see, this is the obvious issue. We were not seeing the research output coming out of the continent related to COVID-19.
Right.
We're just seeing the big stories, like when Senegal came up with this announcement of this fast track testing kit. Then what Africa Archive did is that they started collating all the research output that was coming, whether it was manuscripts, whether it was audiovisual, we were collating and sharing. And we have about how many?
400. So this is basically also why we're here, to show African scholars are actually participating in the scholarly discussions and also in solving this crisis. Of course, there's submissions to journals, there's submissions to archive and bioarchive and meta-archive, wherever things are happening these days, but it's difficult to trace African submissions from that. And with some of our partners, we've basically created search portals with automated searches and discovery opportunities. And thus we can say, hey, there's more than 400 submissions on and from Africa with regards to COVID-19. And then people can go strategically into kind of investigating those. So what's happening in Ethiopia with COVID-19? And they can reach out to the researchers who are the experts in the region. African scholars are our primary target group. I'd also like to mention that we're as well reaching out to non-African scholars, as long as they talk and do research on African topics, to make their work accessible to African scholars in the first place and not hide it behind paywalls, which is happening like way too much.
We're coming almost to the end now. What do your plans are for the future? So based on what you're currently experiencing, you're having better access because people can't travel at the moment, so it's acceptable to actually meet online. From that point of view, it should be easier. But where do you see your trajectory going for the next couple of years? Where do you see Africa Archive will be in 2 or 3 years' time?
So I think that Africa Archive should continue with the same path. So as Johansen shared, we should continue building our community of practice. And as Joy said, we should be continuing bridging this gap between the author or the student or PhD student, the university, and the big publishers. And as Joe also mentioned, we should continue this partnership that are bringing this interoperability that Africa Archive is offering for the community. So now you have like 5 ways to submit an article using a very good practice, best practice of publishing, including having your ORCID ID authorized and authenticated via the platform, having a DOI for your work, and then that should be let's say a vision and a shared mission to keep this online instance and keep this collaboration between all team members, even if we are in different places.
Okay. Anybody else?
Future, working with publishers. Publishers, you want access to African research output, you work with us because the researchers are putting their output through us. That is one way to access research output coming from the continent. That is what I see as the future. That has actually come up a few times. I mean, between peer review week and open access week, that has actually come up several times. So I won't be surprised if one of the publishing societies or publisher decides to partner with us, because that is the way, and that is what is happening actually in the trends in academic publishing. Publishers are working with preprint services. So you want output from Africa, there's a preprint service for African research output. For anyone who's doing research on Africa and about Africa, so you could be out of the continent, but also for researchers coming out of the continent.
Additionally, we would also like to contribute to the capacity building and value chain creation on the continent to support African journals and to support African publishers, to build a scholarly publishing scene on the continent, like in collaboration with previously mentioned stakeholders and others in the ecosystem. So we see ourselves as one pillar in an ecosystem or network of capacity builders and facilitators in the process, adding value to the chain that is already existing and seeing that flourish.
Thank you all so much. I think it is so important that we actually make the science that happens anywhere in the world more visible. Anyway, I wish you all the best for the future, and we hope to see more output coming from Africa. We're looking forward to that.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Peter.